There's absolutely no doubt that God has a special relationship with Israel. And here to talk about that relationship and news of the world today is writer Bill Koenig. And by the way, welcome to Prophecy Watchers.
Thank you, Gary. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Bill, you're a White House correspondent, a reporter, journalist, and a writer. And I've got your brand new book here. It's called Eye to Eye, William Koenig. This book is not like any other book in print. And we're going to start out talking to Bill today to clarify exactly what he's doing, because I think he has a very special calling. And let's talk about that calling you have to write a certain type of information about the nation Israel.
You know, Gary, I saw over and over when American presidents, especially starting with George W. Bush, even though it began with his father, every time we applied pressure on Israel to divide their land, we saw enormous catastrophes happen the same day or within 24 hours. And it's happened over and over again. And it was remarkable. I mean, and we researched all the way back to Madrid Land for Peace Conference, October 1991, when the perfect storm was sending 30-foot waves into President George Herbert Walker Bush's home in Kennebunkport, Maine, as he is at a podium in Madrid, Spain, calling for Israel to give back the West Bank, which is Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland of Israel, and East Jerusalem, to the Palestinians. And at that moment, it wasn't a week or a month or whatever later, it happened at that moment. So over and over, Gary, and I have in this book 127 record-setting catastrophes and events that have taken place when U.S. presidents have applied pressure on Israel to divide their land.
We hear land for peace, and we hear the two-state solution. We hear people talking about, but every one of those ideas tends to make Israel smaller and smaller.
And in indefensible borders. But what I like to point people to what the scripture said, that God, the God of Israel, gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob the land of Israel that they've never fully occupied. It goes from the Euphrates River through 5 countries and into the Wabi River in Egypt.
Do you mind if I just read that?
Please.
I've got Genesis 12 open in my Bible here, and it begins with the Abrahamic Covenant, you know, where the Lord said to Abram, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee." Well, everybody knows what that land is.
Absolutely. So this is covenant land. What's important about the Abrahamic Covenant, Gary, that you mentioned, it's an everlasting covenant. It's still in place. And what I determined is that no earthly leader, well-meaning or not, has the right to divide or partition the land of Israel. And even Joel 3:2 speaks of those that attempt to partition the land of Israel will be judged. Zechariah 12:3, the city of Jerusalem will eventually, in the final days, become a burdensome stone. In Zechariah 12:9, that God will destroy those nations that come against Israel. So this land is not, there is no other land like this in the world.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I'd like to read Clause 2 of the covenant. It says, "And I will make thee a great nation. I'll bless thee and make thy name great, and thou wilt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed." Now, when you read those 3 verses in Genesis 12, that's very definite, very definitive. It does not mince words.
It's very precise that God intended to bless anybody that blessed Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants, the Jewish people. Those who did not, there's a history of being cursed. When you come against God's chosen, there will be consequences. Whether it's attempting to evict them from their homes, as what happened in 2005 when 9,500 Jews were forced from their home, to dismantling settlements, whether they're legal or not.
All right.
The God of Israel put it in their hearts for the Jews to go back to the homeland. And as you know, Gary, this is one of the prophetic fulfillments of Scripture that's pointing to our soon return of the Messiah, the fact that Israel's a state today, and that the time clock is the city of Jerusalem, or the state of Israel, and that we are rapidly moving towards this period of time.
And you know, Bill, I think people have been saying this so long and with such intensity that the thought is, well, you know, that's old hat. That's really not going to happen. And let's talk about something else. But that's not my attitude, and I know it's not your attitude.
Not at all. And when I see these events happen over and over again, when I saw them happen for Bush, Clinton, and Bush, and Obama, and now Trump, I go, this is just continues to confirm over and over again that you touch that land, the greater let me put it this way, the greater the pressure on Israel to divide their covenant land, the greater the corresponding catastrophe in America. And Gary, I've even seen hurricanes, Hurricane Earl in 2010 go back to the ocean when Clinton and Obama said we will not pressure Israel to make peace with the Palestinians, or vice versa. It was a Category 5, became a 2, and went back to the ocean. Or when President Bush was standing, George Bush was with Ariel Sharon at the UN in September 2005, when he said, we will not pressure Israel to do what they don't want to do.
Wow.
Ophelia, that was about to hit the Outer Banks of North Carolina, dissipated and went back to the ocean. And it's, you know, that's why I say the greater the pressure on Israel, the greater the corresponding catastrophe. When I see Israel's land being the focus of the leaders of the nations, you can feel this collective fury and see this atmospheric reaction. It's a mystery, but at the same time you see this, it's like the collective fury or the fire, the wrath of the God of Israel said, that's my land. I do not intend for Judea, Samaria, the biblical heartland of Israel, or the city of Jerusalem to be an Arab state.
Wow. Now, let me read one more clause, and then we'll get into your book and some details. And I'm going now to Genesis 15:18. It says, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates, laying out the basic boundary lines. And then the Lord goes on then to define the covenant more thoroughly. But I have been told that is several 100,000 square miles of land. Israel's never possessed that land, but it's been promised. And you believe that promise is going to be kept.
Well, what's interesting is the debate is whether it will be kept before Jesus returns, or will they not occupy that land until after his return. It's a lot of land. I mean, it's part of Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Syria, Lebanon, where Israel lives now, and also Egypt. And this is a large piece of land, and unfortunately a majority of it is being occupied by Arabs who want to occupy all of Israel's land. The Palestinians actually have a one-state plan. It's they occupying the land of Israel, which will never happen. But nonetheless, we have an international community that's determined to put pressure on Israel. Matter of fact, Gary, this was an interesting one. December 17, 2014, the EU Parliament overwhelmingly voted. I think it was like 591 to 88 in favor of a Palestinian state. That's the day the euro collapsed.
Wow.
Against the dollar. And so these events, most of them have happened that I document in the book, have happened in the United States because we've been the sponsor of the peace process, but also this has happened to Merkel in Germany, whether it's Tony Blair when he was the UK Prime Minister, Sarkozy when he was the French President. It's happened to Putin. It's every leader of the world at any time, whether it's a UN official, EU official, or a nation's leader that's attempted to comment or pressure Israel to divide their land. Things have happened to them and their nation as well.
And it could be of a political nature. It could be of a meteorological nature. The Lord is, what you're saying is the Lord blesses or curses commensurate with one's attitude about his nation, Israel.
Absolutely.
Wow. Now that's a thought. And if this is the first time you've heard this, all of you out there listening to Bill, I got to tell you, he's credible. I've known him. I've talked with him for several years, and I've listened very carefully to what he says. And one's first reaction to this thesis is, oh, that can't be true. But I think it is. And I'd like for you to react to something, and that is global warming. Because, you know, if a hurricane comes up, everybody says, oh, this is happening because of global warming. Or, you know, if something horrible happens, it's global warming. And you're saying, no, not global warming. It's God's judgment. Yeah. That's a different thing.
Yeah, these events happen over and over again. I mean, literally, Gary, when you say 171 events, according to the NOAA,
yeah,
since Madrid, there were billion-dollar events, and over 100 of them have been connected to Israel. That's over 60% of the billion-dollar events. And as I've said again, which is key, the greater the pressure in Israel, the greater the corresponding catastrophe. Katrina, Harvey, Irma recently, 9/11. I mean, these all have, Hurricane Andrew, they all have a connection. The tornado outbreaks that we saw during Obama's term. It was interesting is during Obama's time in office, it was mostly tornado outbreaks and floods. And during Bush and now Trump, it's these record-setting hurricanes of 2004 and 5 during George W. Bush's term, and then 2017 with these recent events connected to Trump. But I think what's important here, Gary, with this whole dynamic is this is a very special land. And in other words, these leaders are attempting to force Israel off of land that they have been given by the God of Israel. And it's occupied by who God wants to occupy it. It's not occupied territory, Palestinian territory. This is God's occupied land.
You know, but before we go forward, let's go back a bit, because I've read quite a bit about the modern history of Israel and the era of World War I, World War II. And those were days of a terrible curse in the world. And commensurately, you look at what was happening to Israel in those days, and you can easily make the case that God was showing his displeasure during that period prior to when Israel became a nation. Because there was huge opposition to that. I know the British were opposed to it and tried to stop it. And,
well, you know, it's interesting in that perspective, the Christians have had especially British Christians, have had an enormous role with the state of Israel. I mean, it was Lord Balfour, who was a devout Christian that came up with the Balfour Agreement, that eventually the international community made sure that didn't get implemented. But his idea was for Israel to occupy all their land plus what's called Transjordan today, a large amount of land, because these Jewish people have a right to their own land. General Allenby also 1917 is the one that defeated the Ottoman Empire in the city of Jerusalem, chased them out. He was also Christian. And then also Ord Wingate, he was a brilliant general, a British general that taught Israel the gift of preemptive strikes, how to be a warrior, how to hit first, and to take advantage of the fact that they're smaller and less in number. That was a gift. And throughout period of time, and even today, Gary, that you can relate to, Israel's best friends are committed evangelicals that understand the biblical significance of the state of Israel. And they greatly appreciate that. So we, the Christians, have had a very significant role all along with this process. And we've also had a very significant role of telling the presidents, you know, you're not supposed to divide that land, because if you do, there's going to be consequences. And I wrote President Bush 4 different times. The letters are in the book. I recently wrote President Trump and told him, you know, you're a great friend of Israel, but that land is not to be divided. I'm paraphrasing. But, you know, you have to be very careful, because this is what's happened to previous presidents that have attempted to divide the land that God intended for the Jewish people to occupy.
Now, what Bill does in this book, and I'm just glancing at the list of catastrophes and events, you've got these numbered. And you take case by case by case and demonstrate what happened and what you think was associated with it.
Yeah, the previous book, Gary, when I was on with you all, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel, had 57 events. That was President Bush's father, Bill Clinton's 2 terms, and President Bush's first term through Katrina, Rita, Wilma. So what I've done in this book, I've 60% new content. There has been 72 additional events that have transpired in Bush's second term, Obama's 2 terms, in Trump's first 8 months in office. I mean, he's already had 6 events,
Wow.
and he's a friend of Israel. But he has a plan that we can get into later. But the fact is, Trump believes that he might be able to bring peace. He wants to see Israel live in peace and security. I believe Bush did too, as well as Clinton, as well as Bush. There's still debate about Obama. But nonetheless, these are friends of Israel. Good intended friends of Israel.
Yeah.
But this land is God's land. Again, no earthly leader has the right to partition or divide that land. It's a very special land.
But land for peace seems to be the theme over and over again. If
Well-
Israel will give up just a little more, there will be peace.
What's
right?
very interesting about Land for Peace is the Houston citizen, George Herbert Walker Bush, is the one that started the Land for Peace process with the persuasion of Secretary of State Jim Baker, who's also from Houston. They promoted the Madrid Land for Peace conference along with Gorbachev. He co-sponsored that before the Soviet Union collapsed. And then President George W. Bush is the one that came up with the slogan, 2 states living side by side in peace and security. They finished that work on 9/10. That was about to be given to the UN, but 9/11 stopped President Bush's 2-state plan being given to the UN. So the key here, Gary, is we've got the 57 events of the previous book. I've updated the chapter on replacement theology. I have a really interesting chapter on Netanyahu and his situation today, and then the events of these presidencies. And, you know, what can you say? When you see these things happen statistically, and is just off the chart.
And paraphrasing the Bible, when you see these things begin to happen, then look up, for your redemption draws
Correct.
near. And here's the thing I have to ask now. How did you first encounter this idea? When did it come into your head that, hey, there's a connection here. I need to write about this?
What was interesting is I'd seen it for a while, myself and a couple of friends. We'd all start talking about this. That we would put pressure on Israel, and then these major catastrophes would happen. Right after I moved to Washington, D.C., I was introduced to a guy named John McTernan. And John had already documented this information, and he and I wrote Israel, the Blessing or the Curse. What's interesting about that book, which is out of print now, is we did everything we could to get that book finished, but we kept having challenges through that summer and up until late August 2001. And then 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
The God of Israel wanted to have 9/11 in the first book, Israel, the Blessing and Curse, that John and I did. And then I told John, I said, I want to take this into a deeper study. I want to study every Middle East leader that's attempted to divide the land and what happened to him. Every Middle East leader that's attempted to divide the land had catastrophic endings to their life, early endings, health issues, over and over again. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Hafiz Assad, you name it, they had problems. Nasser of Egypt, Anwar Sadat. And then I also noticed every U.S. president, all the way back to Roosevelt, who said to the king of Saudi Arabia, if Israel ever wants to become a state, I'll let you know. A week, and put that in writing to the king of Saudi Arabia. A week later, he died, replaced in office by Harry Truman, who made sure Israel became a state. Dick Nixon's mother believed that there would be a day that he would have the opportunity to stand up for Israel. She was a very strong Christian, a strong believer. And Dick Nixon had a huge role in providing, along with General Alexander Haig, the weapons that Israel needed to be successful in the secret attack Yom Kippur War. So you look at every president, and I think that's important, even when you look at Obama. All our presidents have had a prophetic, significant role, especially our presidents of the last, let's say, 100 years or so. They have a biblical role. So that by itself, Gary, is very interesting because our presidents, where it's not obvious, we're not obvious in the biblical scriptures, but no nation in the world has done more to accelerate final day events in the United States through the office of the White House.
You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I've been to Israel a couple of times, only a couple of times. You've been there, of course, many times. But I've noticed something. When I go to Israel, and other people have commented on the same thing, there's a kind of a spirit in Israel that defies description. You can feel it. It's almost like you can feel the blessing of God in the air. I don't know how to say it.
That's right.
Other than that.
That's right. And you'll feel safer there than in your own home. It's something supernatural because it's
is.
God's presence over the land.
And you can literally feel it. And
And you also could feel the tension in Jerusalem too.
oh, absolutely. And then when you get on the plane to come back home, suddenly you know something's missing. What is it?
Absolutely, Gary. That's very special.
It
I
is
tell people
special.
they need to experience that. A lot of people haven't been to Israel, but there's something very special about Israel.
So
because
that-
it's his land. You know,
That
it's
being
his-
the case,
his people.
then this is the way it's working out. In other words, the Spirit of God is active in Israel today, and this is it's almost so unbelievable that you don't dare speak it. But I do believe it, and I know you do.
Absolutely. We are blessed to be living in the time spoken of by the Jewish prophets of the Old Testament
Yeah.
and Jesus Christ at the Olivet Discourse and other times in the Bible. But we literally are living at the time prior to Yeshua's return for his 1,000-year millennial reign.
Bill's new book, and by the way, it's been completely recrafted, and I've read his original work, and this is really laid out so that you can understand the premise. And we're going to offer that to you here a bit later, but I want to talk about your DVD, Eye to Eye. What are people going to encounter here?
Well, with the DVD, I focus on major events during President Bush's father, George Bush's father, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and most of Obama's 8 years. That's major events within those administrations with an emphasis on George W. Bush and Obama in the catastrophes. It's about a little over an hour long, but it's very comprehensive. And it shows pictures and videos and statistics.
You know, when, and it's really amazing to me, you can see so much of the Bible in modern Israel. When Benjamin Netanyahu ran for office, he ran, his campaign posters said, peace and safety, which are biblical words, you know, and they are alert words. That is to say, if you're a student of Bible prophecy, you know that one of the hallmarks of the latter days is that people are going to be looking for peace and safety. And
Out of Thessalonians, first
Yeah.
or second at 5:3. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And that's right. He's ran on that.
he has. And if there's ever been a human being in a key position, it's got to be Benjamin Netanyahu. Talk about him for a minute.
He really is, and it's interesting because I had a chance to give him eye to eye in Florida a few years ago. It was very interesting at the time. He wasn't feeling very well. We were in a small room with other Christians, and the Lord just put in my heart, just sit still, forget the photo op with the Prime Minister, and just stand there. So a medical doctor walks up and starts talking to him, and then pulls down both of his eyelids to look in his eyes. Got up and left, and the Lord goes, now, give it to him. So I turned the book around, and then Netanyahu pulls it up, and it says, eye to eye. He just completely laughed. He said, because he just had both his eyes looked into, and the symbolicness of eye to eye being handed to him at that time. In the chapter I have here, I mentioned that even Rabin, even though he was a hero of Israel, and even though Sharon was a hero of Israel, and Omer was a friend of Israel, especially Omer and Sharon, they had legal problems at the time they were pressuring Israel to divide their land. As a matter of fact, Ehud Olmert had to collapse his government and step down. So right now, Netanyahu's under some potential problems. There's two significant cases, possibly two others. And obviously the liberal media in Israel and the leftists don't like Netanyahu, where many Christians, he's one of our favorite prime ministers, if not the favorite prime minister. He's a remarkable guy, has a great following here in the U.S. But, you know, he lost his government the first time when I had a good friend of mine say, you know, if you give up that land, you're going to be the former prime minister. And that's what happened right after the Y Plantation Agreement in 98. And this happens to a lot of the Israeli prime ministers. They give up the land, they are either indicted or they have to, their government collapses.
And I presume you've noted some
Totally.
of the, you've noted these
Total
things.
details. It's fascinating.
And you're going to, speaking of fascinating, you really are going to find this fascinating. Eye to Eye by Bill Koenig, White House correspondent, credentialed Washington correspondent, has years and years as a watcher of world events here and in Israel, all over, and has a very special insight that I think you're going to enjoy sharing in this book, Eye to Eye, and the DVD. As we do here at Prophecy Watchers, we put things into packages to make them more informative. And by the way, a better buy for you. We're going to accompany these two books with a third. It's called Revealed, Obama's Legacy. And that one I have read, and that's an eye-opener, to use a word. You really, I think, hit on some insights there that explain why we are where we are today.
Well, thank you, Gary. It's a summary of 8 years of being there watching, and I believed it had to be written. Matter of fact, one of the national Christian leaders said, I am so thankful you wrote this book, because if you hadn't, a lot of this would have never been brought to the public. And that was the purpose of writing Revealed, and it was based on Luke 12:2.
We're calling this the Eye to Eye package. Yours for a gift of $50. You can call the 800 number on your screen. You can go to prophecywatchers.com and click the online bookstore. Scroll down to Bill Koenig, and you'll find the Eye to Eye package. Yours for a gift of $50. And by the way, we're going to include, speaking of going to Israel, a DVD of our trip to Israel. We call this Join Us in Jerusalem, and we're just going to give it to you because we'd like for you to share our trip. It's the Eye to Eye package, yours for a gift of $50. And believe me, if you want to know the mechanics, I guess to put it in cold terms, the details on how God works to preserve his people, modern Israel, you're not going to find a better read than Eye to Eye.
Thank you, Gary.
And I hope you keep up the good work. By the way, you're still diligently watching what's going on. What's going on right now? Just give us a little.
Well, it's been interesting. I've been at the White House 16 and a half years, and it's been confrontational ever since President Trump was elected, even prior to election. And it's 85 to 90% of the media doing everything they can to stop this president. He's got 10 evangelicals in his cabinet. He's got a great defense team. He's not a perfect man, like none of us. And at times, he has great weeks, and sometimes he says things. I go, "Why did you say that? You had such a good week." But
his flaws seem to be more visible.
Yeah, they are, especially with that media that wants to do everything they can to disqualify him as president. But fortunately, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is there. That's Mike Huckabee's daughter. She's an evangelical press secretary. She's excellent.
Wow.
A lot of believers up there. Kellyanne Conway, Mike Pence is a very strong believer. So it's a challenging time for the president with what he's having to face, but it's also an exciting time to be there.
It is. White House correspondent Bill Koenig, what a guy. He's out there every day just tracking down these stories for you to read. And by the way, if there is a friend of Israel, it's Bill Koenig, and we join him in that. We pray for Israel, the leaders of Israel, pray for our president, Donald Trump, to have the right attitude about Israel. And I think you've got the book here that documents the consequences if you don't.
Absolutely. We pray that he will fully understand that no one has the right to divide that land, even if there's good intention.
Bill, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Gary.
I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, you keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.